the defining scam of our time. This is a deep-seated conflict of interest in the ESG movement itself. The hypocrisy of corporate America is laughable.
There's a deeper problem here. We used to have a national identity built around the shared pursuit of excellence. We now have a national identity built around victimhood instead.
Are we a nation of free speech or are we not? Free speech is not intended for the speech we love. It is intended for the speech that we do not love. If we lose that principle, we lose the very principle we're fighting for in the first place.
Thank you. I'm going to take you back to a moment in 1993 when I heard Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech for the first time. That was the speech where he said, I hope my 4 children grow up in a country where they are judged not on the color of their skin, but on the content of their character. Thank you. That dream, it stuck with me. It meant something to me because it was the dream that allowed me to go in a single generation from being the kid of Indian immigrants who came to this country with almost no money to becoming the founder of a multi-billion-dollar biotech company. Thank you. I led that company as CEO. We got a number of drugs developed. 5 of them are FDA-approved products today. The one I am most proud of is an approved drug for prostate cancer, but I stepped down as CEO of that company to focus on a different kind of cancer. Not a biological cancer, but a cultural cancer that threatened to kill that dream that Martin Luther King had 60 years ago. That threatened to kill the dream that allowed me to achieve everything I ever have in my life. And that is a new secular religion in this country, whose belief system centers on the idea that your identity is based on your race, your gender, and your sexual orientation, full stop. That if you're black, you're inherently disadvantaged. That if you're white, you're inherently privileged. No matter your economic background or upbringing, your race and your gender govern who you are and what you can achieve in your life. Now, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley of the Squad, she actually summarized this philosophy pretty well when she said, we don't want any more brown faces that don't want to be a brown voice. I'm gonna guess I don't fit her description of what counts as a brown voice. But I will tell you this, there's a really clever move in there, that when your race goes from being about your skin color to being about the content of the ideas you're allowed to have, then any disagreement with those ideas automatically means that you are a racist. And there is no greater damnation in modern America than to be called a racist. So when given the choice between pledging allegiance to this new religion and being tarred with the scarlet R, everyday Americans are choosing to bend the knee. And that has created a new culture of fear in our country. Fear of losing your jobs. Fear of your kids getting a bad grade in school. Fear of becoming a pariah in your own community. And that culture of fear has replaced our culture of free speech in America. And if you ask me, the best measure of the health of any democratic society, especially American society, is the percentage of people who feel free to say what they actually think in public. And right now, we are doing abysmally on that metric. Thank you. Now, there's a question of where all this started. I actually think a lot of it dates back to an unexpected place. The 2008 financial crisis. You probably remember it. What happened on the back of the 2008 financial crisis is you had a government in this country, under a Republican administration, mind you, that used public money to bail out a bunch of bankers who made a lot of money when times were good, but got bailed out by taxpayers when money went bad. So what the old left wanted to do in this country was to take money from all those wealthy corporate fat cats and redistribute it to poor people to help poor people. Agree or not, that is what the old left had to say. But something else happened in 2008. Barack Obama was elected as President of the United States. And at that same time, there was a birth of a new left in this country that said the real problem wasn't quite economic injustice. It wasn't quite poverty, not anymore. It was racial injustice and misogyny and bigotry and climate change. And guess what? This was the gift of a generation to Wall Street and big business in this country. Because if you're Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street is a pretty tough pill to swallow. But the new woke stuff is actually pretty easy. You applaud diversity and inclusion. You put some token minorities on your boards. You muse about the racially disparate impact of climate change. After you fly on a private jet to Davos, this is pretty good work if you can get it. But they did not do it for free. They expected the new left to look the other way when it came to leaving their own corporate power intact. And it worked. That is the story of how a bunch of big banks got in bed with a bunch of woke millennials. Together they birthed woke capitalism, and they used that to put Occupy Wall Street up for adoption. And it worked so well for Wall Street that Silicon Valley then got in on the act. And what Silicon Valley realized was that the old breakup big tech actually used to come from the left. So what they said is, we'll make that same deal with you. We will censor hate speech and misinformation as you define it from the internet. But we will not do it for free. We expect the new left to look the other way when it comes to leaving our monopoly power intact. And again, it worked masterfully for both sides. That is the story of this arranged marriage. It is not a marriage of love, I assure you. It is more like mutual prostitution, and the net result of that act was the birth of the woke industrial complex, a new force in modern American life that is far more powerful than either big government or big business alone, because it is a hybrid of the two that together can do what neither of them could do on its own. Now, I have bad news. Starting a few years ago, there is a new actor who showed up on the scene to turn that arranged marriage into a three-party affair. That is none other than the Communist Party of China. What they realized is that if we can get those same companies on Wall Street and Silicon Valley and in between, who relentlessly criticize social injustice and climate change in the United States, to not say a peep about actual human rights atrocities in China, then we undercut America's greatest geopolitical advantage of all, and that is not our nuclear arsenal. It is our moral standing on the global stage. That is how you get to Disney, thank you, a couple of years ago, saying it could not shoot a film in the state of Georgia if it passed an anti-abortion statute. This year, that it could not abide a law that said you can't teach first graders and 6-year-olds about gender identity and transgenderism. But just last year goes to film Mulan in the Xinjiang province of China, literally ground zero of the Uyghur human rights crisis, where there are over 1 million religious minorities enslaved in concentration camps, subject to forced sterilization, communist indoctrination, and worse, in one of the greatest atrocities committed by a major nation since the Third Reich of Germany. Disney does not say a peep until the very end of the movie, where they muster up the courage, you could still see it in the credits today, to say, we thank the local authorities for allowing us the privilege of filming here. Same thing for Nike, the NBA, BlackRock, Airbnb, you name it, it's the same story. And you ask yourself why they do it. It's really pretty simple. It comes down to money. Because if you're the CCP, you build a great Chinese wall that prevents you from entering the Chinese market, if you criticize the Chinese government. But if you criticize the United States, they will roll out the red carpet. That is why Tim Cook and Larry Fink are Xi Jinping's circus monkeys. She says jump, they will ask how high, because it comes down to their bottom dollar. You see, we made a mistake in this country starting 20 years ago. Both parties did, saying that we could export Big Macs and Happy Meals, and somehow that was going to spread democracy to places like China. We thought we could use our money to get them to be more like us. Well, what they realized is they could flip that on its head, that they could use their money to get us to be more like them. Or one step worse than that, that they could use our money to get us to be more like them, sending back those Disney movies and iPhones like Trojan horses to undermine the United States from within. Now, the question is, what do we do about it? What's the solution? The first thing I'll tell you is that not all solutions come through politics. We can deliver some of these solutions through the market itself. The three largest asset managers in the United States, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, they are all in China's pocket. They manage together almost as much capital as the US GDP, almost $20 trillion, the greatest aggregation of private capital in human history, using your money, the money of everyday Americans, to force American companies like Exxon and Chevron and others to produce less oil and gas, to adopt racial equity audits, but which most Americans did not actually agree with. But rather than complaining about it, that is why I decided to start Strive, to compete directly with the BlackRocks of the world and use shareholder power to tell these companies to focus on excellence, on products, on services, over politics. Profit is okay, politics is not. And I'm proud to say that when JP Morgan got into the exchange traded funds business, I'm told it took over 2 years for them to get over $1 billion. We crossed a $500 million mark in our first 3 months, and I hope that this is just the beginning with the support of great Americans across this country. But market solutions are not enough. We're going to need a revolution in our politics as well. We're going to need a new GOP in this country, a new conservative movement in this country, a new American movement in this country that unleashes the experiment that we unleashed 250 years ago, starting again today. There's 4 elements to it I'm going to leave you with today before we wrap. And the first of those is probably the most important. It is to restore our culture of free speech in America. Free speech is important. The pursuit of truth depends on not censoring the wrong ideas, because if we censor that which we think is wrong, we will soon discover that some of those wrong ideas turned out to be the right ones in the end. Free speech is a precondition for peace in this country. Because you know what? If you tell people they cannot speak, they will scream. If you tell people they cannot scream, that is when they will start tearing things down. That is why we need to revive free speech for the sake of peace itself in a divided body politic. And it starts not with big tech censorship. I don't call it that anymore. I call it what it is. It starts with government tech censorship, where these companies are working hand in glove with the party in power in the United States to censor speech and content through the back door that government could not censor through the front door under the Constitution. Well, you know what I say? If it is state action in disguise, then the Constitution still applies. These companies ought to be bound by the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States when they are working with the government to do the government's own dirty work through the back door. Thank you. It is not just on the internet. If you look over the last few years, the number of people who have been fired for saying the wrong thing at work, for wearing the hat of the wrong political candidate, for saying the wrong thing on social media, that too is a threat to free speech in America. You know what I say is if you can't discriminate against somebody, fire somebody, or deplatform somebody on account of race, or sex, or sexual orientation, or religion, or national origin, then you should not be able to discriminate against somebody on account of their political beliefs either. We need to make political expression a civil right in this country, right up there next to the other protected classes. Thank you. Now, the old conservatives would tell us that, no, this is another constraint on what private businesses can and cannot do. The market should work this out. You know what I say? I say that is fine if you actually want to get rid of protected classes altogether. If you do, I'm right there with you. But you cannot have it both ways. To say that you can't fire somebody because they're black or gay or Muslim or white or Christian or Jewish or whatever, if that's true, then you should not be able to fire somebody just because they are an outspoken conservative either. We need to apply these standards even-handedly in this country. That's the first thing we need to do, restore that culture of free speech. Second, we need to make sure that the people who we elect to run the government are the people who actually run the government. The next time we have someone like Anthony Fauci or James Comey, who nobody in this country elected to run the government, try to run the government, we need to do more than just complain about it and identify the problem. We need to do what a chief executive in the White House needs to do. You need to fire them, you need to fire the legions of people who work for them, and you need to fire the entire managerial industrial complex underneath and around them. They will say that we have civil service protections in this country and that you can't fire them. Well, you know what? It needs to be at the top of a GOP agenda to repeal those civil service protections and to replace it with a sunset clause that says that nobody ought to be working for the federal government for more than 8 years. If you can't be president more than 8 years, you shouldn't be suckling at the teat of the federal bureaucracy for more than 8 years either. It has gotten so rotten that we got to go even further and recognize you cannot cure a managerial bureaucracy from within. Once it's gotten so cancerous, there is exactly one answer. You have to shut the whole thing down. And if that means half the federal government, that means that's what we need to be prepared to do at this moment in our history. Number 3, we must prepare to defeat China both economically and militarily. We need a military in this country that refocuses its attention on what actually matters. And no, that is not domestic terrorism. No, that is not white rage, as Mark Milley will have you believe. It is not Russia. It is not Ukraine. It is not Iraq. It is not Afghanistan. It is China, full stop, and we need to wake up to that reality. We need to wake up to the fact that in China there is no distinction between economic policy and military policy. They are two sides of the same coin, and that we cannot defeat an enemy who we rely on to buy our shoes and our phones and for our modern way of life. That is what is different about this Cold War versus the one against the Soviet Union in the last century. We did not depend on them to power the way we live our everyday lives. That's something we're going to have to wake up to in this country, starting with the number one weapon that China is wielding right now over each of us through our economy itself. And that is the new cancerous climate religion that is holding the entire American economy back without touching the Chinese economy. They are applying constraints to us and laughing at us at every step of the way. Bet a lot of you didn't know about this. BlackRock will tell Exxon and Chevron to produce less oil, while the companies that pick up the projects they drop include PetroChina on the other side of the world, where guess who, none other than BlackRock, is one of the largest shareholders. This is a charade, but we need a conservative movement that wakes up to the fact that this is not just an economic issue. It is a national security issue and needs to be treated as such. Thank you. And finally, number 4. We need to create a shared national identity for the next generation of Americans. See, my generation, I'm a millennial, we screwed it up. We grew up during a decade of celebrating our diversity and our differences. And make no mistake, our diversity is a fine thing, but I think our diversity is completely meaningless if there is nothing greater that binds us together across that diversity as one people. Without that, we are nothing more than a different looking group of higher mammals roaming a common geographic space, doing what our iPhones told us to do on a given day. That is not America. America was a vision, and I will tell you, our generation is so hungry for a cause. We are hungry for purpose and meaning and identity at a time in our national history when the things that used to give us that sense of purpose, faith, patriotism, hard work, family, whatever it might be, those things have disappeared. We have forgotten that America itself can be that identity. We let the corporates teach us that we can fill our moral hunger by going to Ben & Jerry's and ordering a cup of ice cream with some social justice sprinkles on top without realizing that you can't satisfy a moral hunger with fast food. We need something deeper. We hunger for a nation in this country. We need to revive a civic education for the next generation that teaches young Americans to be proud of our history rather than to be ashamed of it, creating a generation that actually wants to then serve the country so that we don't have a 25% enrollment deficit in our military as we did this year. And the heart of that national identity is actually the revival of excellence and merit itself. We need to put the merit back into America. And when the Supreme Court, mark my words as I believe they will next year, turns over affirmative action in this country, we need to take that movement to every other sphere of American life one at a time, teaching that next generation, as Martin Luther King did, that you get ahead in this country not on the color of your skin, but on the content of your character. Thank you. The inner animal spirit at the heart of our national soul, it has been domesticated, it has been tamed by this new culture that penalizes excellence and celebrates victimhood and mediocrity instead. Our inner animal has leapt oceans to lift up places like China, while their culture of Maoist victimhood has come all the way back here to hold us back instead. You know what I say? When we rallied behind the cry to make America great again 7 years ago, we didn't just hunger for a single man. We hungered for the unapologetic pursuit of excellence in this country. We hungered for that dream I told you about at the very beginning. The idea that no matter who you are or where you came from or what your skin color is, that you can achieve anything you ever want in this country with your own hard work, your own commitment, and your own dedication. And you know what? That you get to speak your mind at every step of the way, that you do not have to choose between the American dream and the First Amendment, between speaking your mind freely and putting food on the dinner table, that this is the nation where you get to enjoy both of those things at the same time. That is the vision that won us the American Revolution 250 years ago. That is the vision that reunited us after the Civil War. That is the dream that won us World War I and World War II and the Cold War. That is the dream that still gives hope to the free world today. And if we can revive those common ideals over fractious group identity and grievance, then nobody in the world, not a nation, not a corporation, not a virus is going to defeat us. That is what true American exceptionalism is all about, and that is what we are going to have to revive to save this great nation. Thank you all. God bless you. God bless our country. Thank you.